also were able to see and hear from Mark on the Joe Rogan Experience on his podcast. They opened up the podcast by talking about the core reasons behind why Mark believes that he started Facebook in the first place, which were, quote, to give people a voice. And Joe wanted to find out more information by asking, quote, how they were going down the path towards increased censorship. Quote, when you were expanding the relationship with the FBI, where they were trying to get you to take down certain things that were true and real, and certain things that tried to get you to limit the exposure on them, Mark claimed that also over the last 10 years there has been a real shift over idolization-based censorship, and Mark believes that it came down to two main events, the first of which being the first election of President Donald Trump in 2016, as well as Brexit in the EU in 2016, and as a sort of fractionization of the European Union, 2020 happened, and this thing called COVID happened, where we faced a huge amount of institutional pressure and based on censor certain content on ideological grounds, worried that he from the beginning was basically becoming this sort of what is true in the world, it's a crazy position to be in, end quote. You could say that was specifically godlike. So his concern here was that he would hold so much power, as we've already discussed in a large conversation related to a lot of the tech companies at the moment, where they could control public discourse to the point where they would control what isn't potentially true. And that was what Mark's concern was, especially as specifically things got into COVID and they were talking about specific, what was going on with the disease, but also some of the concerns. And he did talk about specifically the kind of push from the Biden administration to suppress side effects of vaccines specifically. Mark did claim that he was for vaccines as a whole, but he was concerned with how much push there was from the Biden administration to specifically suppress or remove, in some cases, the potential side effects of these at the time was experimental vaccines. And Mark did talk about the fact that he would rather give people more information so they can make their own educated decision on what they should do or not do. And Mark did push back against the Biden administration's wants to suppress that information. He said he wasn't going to do that. We heard within the podcast as well that across all of Meta's platforms, or more than all of Meta's services, there is 3.2 billion people who use the service every single day, which is roughly around half the planet, which is a very scary statistic to an extent. Joe did also point out, due to the number of hours of content that specifically would need to be looked at, it's very, very challenging to check everything and question these as bad actors. The same is true on YouTube. There's lots of statistics regarding, and if I can find them I'll put them on screen, regarding how many hours of content is uploaded onto YouTube every single day, hence why AI is involved, hence why it's mostly checked by a computer, because it's just not possible, even if you had a huge workforce, the amount of sheer volume of content that's been uploaded every single day onto the platforms would be impossible to police in that respect if you weren't using computers and AI and such. Mark did also claim that all the emails related to what happened were out there for everyone to see. And also he explained and talked about when he potentially didn't do what the Biden administration wanted him to, then he was starting to be regulated. We're looking into Facebook by banking regulators, which he felt was a bit odd and a bit concerning and a bit weird, because he thought that it was they didn't really understand the space. They weren't really the comms or the Ofcom equivalent for the social media or the tech space. So why is a banking regulator necessarily looking into them, and he potentially thought that it was mainly doing it because he was potentially not liked by people in the Biden administration. They also talked about the fact that, quote, freedom of speech, and Joe pointed out that where Twitter, now X, did remove Trump when he was still in office. Specifically, we covered this a while ago in a handful of shows ago. Mark also personally believes that community notes are a better way of adding context, end quote, with a high level, with the level of personal or any bias being added to what isn't and is or isn't true. He also shares of how he plans to use AI to combat bot farms, as AI can be trained on how to look at what account is acting like, and it's then likely determine whether it is a bot or not. So he used the example of, I believe if I recall correctly, it was like if a account is outputting like 1 million inputs a minute or a second, then quite obviously that's going to be a bot. So this is a way of distinguishing between a bot account or one that's been drawn or used by a computer, and then a human, a normal account in that respect as well. He was also asked specifically to bot banner. In his example was used on drug content. He explained why, regardless of how he makes a newer system, it does mean that more content will be on the platform as a whole, but because of the nature of how they're doing it and how precise that check is going to be, they feel that they're going to make less mistakes, and they're going to have a better balance between innocent people who are trying to potentially educate on maybe those topics, or maybe other topics specifically, but specifically drug use, and maybe what happens when the computer does get it wrong. And it did sound like he was looking to have, as we've already alluded to and we've already talked about, he's leaning more into the freedom of expression element of policy internally, rather than being overly concerned about being the martyr of truth as a whole. They also talked about Mark's views around misinformation, and a view that's or a view that someone may not like online, and how some political parties use the term misinformation to close down the opposite point of view. He claimed that some things that got to the point where he felt that something anyone would say in the mainstream conversation, like linking back to the safety of vaccines that we already talked about, would then be shut down because they were going against the mainstream conversation on that was being discussed by government, but also being echoed by mainstream consumption. And as we reported a handful of episodes ago, people, I believe it's about 23 to 24% of Americans at the moment, do get their news from a form of social media as well. And there is a larger, potentially growing demographic of people who do look to channels like myself or other independent news sources to get their news, more than those larger, CNNs, Fox, BBC, etc., depending on where you are and where you get your news from, of course. Mark also shared how and why he chose to make Dana White part of the Meta's board, with Mark thinking that he, quote, is a world-class entrepreneur, and he also thinks he's going to do very well. They also go into a few other topics, specifically regarding training, because as you know, or potentially may not know, Mark is training in MMA, fighting, and also in jiu-jitsu, so they talked about that with Joe as well. They also talked a little bit about hunting, and they also touched on a bit about corporate culture and the fact that he claims that the culture should be welcoming and hiring good people who do good work, but we can hurt a great company culture by claiming masculinity or masculine traits are necessarily bad. They also talk about the mental health benefits of potentially not reading comments online. And then we also got on to some of Mark's thoughts as a parent when it comes to policing and talking about children specifically using their platform specifically. So obviously he did mention, outside of the messaging for kids app, which you need parental consent and parental controls are in place on, anyone under the age of 13 should not be using their services in that respect as well. And it does say that within the App Store as well, even though, of course, some people do get around it by potentially lying about their date of birth and equivalent in that respect. I guess sort of sees technology as a opportunity for his daughter. So he gave the example of a child potentially would be using Lego bricks to build things when he allows his daughter to build things in Minecraft as a continued creative outlet, and doesn't necessarily limit that time, but he is aware and is looking at constantly whether it's affecting her sleep, for example. But some parents may say actually Minecraft is just playing video games and they want to limit that time. So Mark did want to give and continues to share more and more updates related to giving those parents the opportunity to be able to tailor what they want and be in line with their values, specifically when it comes to how they want to bring up their own children. They then moved on to talking about how VR specifically has helped doctors when they do VR training make less mistakes in the real world, and Joe feels that it's, quote, a cheat code to be able to use VR to be able to learn many skills that are needed in the real world and be able to really fine-tune what you do with those skills. They also talked a percentage of the time about some of the haptic feedback loops that Mark wants to work on, and Joe thinks that Mark should work on when it comes to haptic feedback regarding their Meta Quest kind of AI wearables and the things they're doing with the smart wearable glasses by Ray-Ban as well. And they also talked about how Mark sees a lot of the conversations in reality now moving towards potentially AI contact lenses and having AI as a real part, an integral part to our lives, because he, quote, side texts about whilst meetings are happening to other colleagues and gets their opinion, and he feels that if you do meet someone in person, that would be obviously horribly rude to do so and wouldn't necessarily be socially accepted. But if you were wearing, say, Ray-Bans, you could get AI to help you when you have a blank about words, for example, or look into a bit more detail on something, then it potentially would be better and could be more kind of surrounding or kind of inclusive. And he said that the future is going to be, having these merged worlds, this digital aspect that we obviously have at the moment, along with the physical world as well. So our attention will still go to the physical world, but it will have holograms, it will have lots of bits of information, whether that's on glasses or contact lenses as well. And he said that also, to be honest, the rise of AI is likely, and he, quote, believes that you could have, and the solution to all of these things and the growth of AI is actually having it open source and allowing everyone to have it, and having this world where he talked about, if we have an adversity government or etc. that is against potentially Western values, having them only have AI or the only one with AI is a bad world to be in, and a potentially bad culturally world to be in because of the lack of diversity that you can potentially have. And his solution was actually having multiple AIs and having as many competitors as possible. Number one, because of innovation, but also number two, it allows AIs to potentially then defend against each other in that respect as well. They did touch on the fact of the study or the conversation around what happened in a closed environment in OpenAI when ChatGPT did copy itself when they were trying to test those guardrails. And I'll leave an article down below if you do want to share or read that a little bit more. We might cover it a little bit more in next week's show. Mark also believed that there is a world in this year where Meta and other businesses working on AI tools will have mid-level engineers who can write code as AI workers specifically, and he pointed out that AI is going to be used to remove a lot of grunt work. So he used the example of 100 plus years ago or so, a lot of people, we had to basically have the majority of the people work on farms to ensure that we had enough food to specifically survive, right? And then we used technology, and we used technological advancements to make it more and more efficient at doing that, so it freed the humans up to be in a position where actually it's mostly commoditized, and in a position where we can have more creative outlets, and the jobs and the profitability, you could say, of those jobs being creative is actually where the value lies. And there's been a lot of conversation about, is there going to be people who, the people who are going to profit off the AI wave are going to be people who know how to use it and understand how to leverage it to basically increase efficiency, but also allow you to create more and be able to, especially in the marketing space, be able to create more efficiently, more of it, but also to be able to create potentially a better solution to a marketing problem in that respect as well. They also then talked about the challenges that Joe had about removing or going away from Apple's world, and some of the kind of lockdown tech that Apple has, and potentially what Mark feels is actually going to be a disadvantage to the company as a whole. And he said, and a quote, when asked about locking down, Mark believes that, quote, "The good news is about the tech industry is it's likely super diversified, and things are continuing to be innovated. And I think companies, if you don't do a good job for 10 years, eventually you're just going to get beaten by someone." Mark did talk about the pros and cons related to obviously his product, the Meta Quest, and the Vision Apple Pro, because they talked about specifically if you are using it for VR gaming specifically, then he believes that the Meta Quest is a better product. If you're using a specific use case for the Vision Apple Pro version 1, for example, watching movies on it, then because it has a sharper screen, then it is going to be a better experience for that specific use case. They all then talked about some of the concerns and some of the worries about the text, whether it's actually encrypted or not, regarding when it talks to Apple and Android devices. And that's why Mark personally uses his own product, which is WhatsApp, but he does say that it's the same signal, same tech that's used to encrypt those messages from WhatsApp and Signal, and that Meta specifically as a company cannot access that data specifically in regards to what is in the message, and the only way you can do that is if you hack the phone, because they talked about the NSA and Tucker Carlson as he was prepping to interview Vladimir Putin, that the US, the NSA in the US knew, and it's likely that they used a piece of technology to see or hack into Tucker's phone rather than necessarily breaching the encryption on Signal specifically. And Mark did point out that he believes that the government should be helping, especially the American government, should be helping American companies be successful with AI and tech innovation to potentially protect our culture, but also, of course, for them to benefit from this technology as well. So what do you think about Mark's and Joe's conversation? I'll leave all the links, as always, down below. But should the US government push back against, of the US government pushed Facebook to stop sharing the side effects about vaccines, for example? And, is that an issue? Do you think that the cutting of fact checking from Facebook or Meta is a good or a bad thing? Do you feel that the community note idea that Elon brought to Twitter, that's now X specifically, is that a better solution in a freedom of speech world? I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below, but that is going to wrap up the end of that story and the end of this show. So thank you ever so much for joining me once again. If you do want to hear what's going on in social media and how it can help your business moving forward, I would love for you to subscribe and let me know what you think down below. But thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me, and I'll see you very, very soon.